Hey, so this is for today the notes over the last section in the tissues unit. So we're looking at muscle tissue and nervous tissue. There's four things total, so we're going to do them all together. So starting off with muscle, we know that there's cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, and smooth muscle. They're all going to use ATP to generate force to allow for movement. And then we're going to separate these out into their individual functions. So starting off with skeletal muscle, this is the stuff that when we think about like working out, these are all the muscles that you're trying to make bigger or trying to tone up, all your skeletal muscles. Because of the way that the cells are organized with each other, they actually form these bands or striations. And so that's what you see with all these little stripes, okay, is that there's just repeating units and they're nicely organized kind of in lines or in rows. And so we see these kind of band patterns called striations. So other things going on in here. Individual skeletal muscle cells are multinucleated. So you see all of those dark circle or dark purple well, circle is not the right word, but you know what I'm talking about here, these loby things. I can't think of a word right now. They're long and cylindrical, like a string, or like when we think of like a fiber. I always think of like yarn, right? Because when you like let it lay there, it's round, like a pole even. That would work as well. So looking here at for the labeling packet, right? So noticing the striations, the little lines that separate this. We have the nuclei. Whoops. And so when looking at skeletal muscle, again, the main thing is the striations. It's going to look really similar to cardiac muscle because cardiac muscle also has striations, but we're going to see in cardiac that there's something separate that makes them appear different. But for this one, we'll see that we have the striations going perpendicular to these long spaces in between individual fibers. For cardiac muscle, it is involuntary, meaning that you can't control it. You can't sit here and say, okay, heart, beat faster. You can do things to make it happen, but you can't directly control your heartbeat. And so because of that, it's considered involuntary versus your skeletal muscles were voluntary. You can decide to move your arms and legs around. It's only found in the heart for pumping blood through the heart and through the blood vessels. And then for characteristics, we've got the striations again. It has regular units of cells, and so we form those striations. There's only going to be one nucleus in each of the cells. And then these cells are going to be branching. That's going to be the big thing along with this next one. This is going to be one of the main things that helps you identify it versus skeletal muscle is that they will branch. And then the last part being these things called intercalated discs. These are little junctions between one cardiac muscle cell and the next one, and it actually helps for electrical impulses to move faster through heart tissue. So when you look here, you see there's like this like jagged edge, and we also see that there's branching. The branching is actually even more prominent over here. So we see the striations, just like we did in the skeletal muscle, right? There's all these perpendicular going up and down like this, striations or lined patterns. Then we see the branching. So this one splits and goes up and it goes down from here over to here to here. Whoops. Sorry. And here, going all the way around, that like Y with an extra stick on it type of shape, that is all one cardiac muscle cell. And so within there, for that particular one, we don't see the nucleus, but we see a nucleus of one here. We see a nucleus of, that's actually for tissue underneath it, the nucleus of one here. You have to keep in mind with these pictures that these are still three-dimensional objects that we have tried to sliver and view in 2 dimensions. So that's part of why it's like we don't see the nucleus for every single one of these cells, or that we see the nucleus for other tissues surrounding it, simply because This is a three-dimensional object that we're viewing in 2 dimensions. But we have the branching and everything as well. So let's compare them side by side. Again, so notice that there is not as obvious of branching in this one, but you see those intercalated discs. If you were told that this was muscle tissue, it should be pretty obvious that it's not going to be smooth, which we haven't seen yet. But because of these intercalated discs, these dark purple lines going up and down, that it's not skeletal muscle, it has to be cardiac muscle. So looking here, we have our striations, right? The lines, the vertical or perpendicular lines. We have the individual nuclei. This is a cell, so again, notice that there's the branching because it's all of here to here. I'm going to try not to click this time. From here, here, and around. That's all one cardiac muscle cell. Okay, so in between those then will be the intercalated discs, which will be between adjacent cardiac muscle cells. Then we get to smooth muscle. Generally, I think of like my digestive organs with this, but it's any of those organs that aren't your brain and aren't your bladder and aren't glands. So almost everything else is made of some type of smooth muscle. Also involuntary. Oh, goodness. Sorry. Forgot that I had Zoom going on from the end of the last class. It's involuntary. You can't sit here and be like, okay, stomach, churn my food faster, make it move faster so that my metabolism can increase. You can't do that, right? So it's involuntary. Where else do we find it? So in the stomach, the uterus, the blood vessels. So keep that in mind with the cardiac muscle tissue. It is only in the heart, even though it said that the function is to pump it through the blood vessels. That's talking about the heart itself squeezing and getting the blood to the blood vessels. Within your actual blood vessels, your arteries and veins, they're going to be made of smooth muscle. And it's mostly going to be your arteries when we get really specific because veins lack most muscularity. So we'll focus on arteries. They move with peristalsis, which is, I always think of those freeze pops that you get at the grocery store that come in, I don't have one, that come in like a clear package. They're like a tube, and they're just like different color liquids, and you throw them in the freezer, and now you've got a popsicle. And then you cut the top of that open, and you like pinch, 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 and it pushes its way up to the top for you to eat it. That's what I think of with peristalsis. It's going to be kind of like a squeeze and push, a squeeze and push, a squeeze and push to make objects move through. So like in the small intestine, right, it's going to squeeze the food along there. Same with the blood. It's going to like squeeze and release and squeeze and release, and as there's going to be another layer of the muscle that pushes it along in that same process. There will not be any visible striations. These don't have regular band patterns, so they're not all lined up to make those striations. They're much more irregular in where they pop up, and so there won't be striations for this one. The cell shapes, instead of being branches or rods, they're actually going to be spindle shaped, and each cell has its own individual nucleus. So looking here, we see the diagram versus looking at it under a microscope. So see how there are lines, but there aren't the striation, jagged movements moving across our slide here. So when we go to identify these, like on our labeling packet, okay, looking at smooth muscle, where would these be found? In all of our hollow organs. We see the nuclei there. Whoops. We see the nuclei, and there are no striations. Okay, so if you were told that this was a type of muscles tissue, you should be able to know immediately that it's got to be smooth muscle because there are no striations and there are no intercalated discs. And then we get to nervous tissue, which is generally, when we think of nervous tissue, we think of our nerves. But there are also supporting cells around our nerves called neuroglia. And we will get into the individual functions of those different kinds when we get to the nervous system at the end of the semester. But to be able to identify them, notice how there's this big body with these long tails coming off of it and all these different connection points. Okay, so the only places that you find nerve cells would be in the brain, in the spinal cord, and your peripheral nerves are going to be when we think of how, but aren't there nerves that go to our skin and all of those places? Yes, there are. This is a generalized nerve. Later on, we'll find that a lot of them look different. With those peripheral nerves, these bodies are going to be back in your central nervous system, so in your spinal cord, and then this axon part is going to be what extends all the way through your arm and out to your either your skin or your bones or your muscles, and there will be multiple of those in different areas, bringing that information back to your brain and sending information out for you to be able to do stuff. So with labeling, we have the neuron, which is the neural cell body. We have the nucleus at the center of it. The neuroglia are those supporting cells, which over here you see are these little like dots that appear everywhere else. Do you also see how nerve cells kind of look like stars almost as well? Okay, the cellular processes or axons are the parts coming off of here, but anything projecting from it would be a process. And then, so that's the end for that. We did skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and nervous tissue. So being able to identify those and talk about where you would find them in the body. Okay.